"You could have died, Dad." Those were the exact words my son Alexander said to me while I was lying on my kitchen floor, with a broken arm and barely able to breathe. They weren't words of concern. They weren't words of love. They were cold, calculated words, spoken with an indifference that chilled my blood more than the physical pain I was feeling in that moment. What he didn't know was that this fall, this moment of extreme vulnerability, would reveal something that would change our lives forever. My name is Robert Henderson. I'm 74 years old, and I've been a hard-working man all my life here in Chicago, Illinois. I worked 45 years as a civil engineer, building bridges, highways, and buildings that still stand today. I married my beloved wife Margaret when I was 25, and together we raised our 3 children, Alexander, Catherine, and Michael. Margaret passed away 8 years ago from cancer, and since then I've been living alone in the house we built together in Lincoln Park. Before I continue with this story that has profoundly marked my life, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who are here listening from the bottom of my heart. I know your days are full of responsibilities, worries, and 1,000 things to do, and yet you've decided to spend this time with me in such an intimate moment. That means more to me than you can imagine. If this story touches you in any way, if you feel it's worth being heard by more people, I ask you from my soul to share your support with a like. And if you believe other fathers, other sons, other families could benefit from hearing this, I invite you to subscribe to this channel where every day we share real stories that help us reflect on life. Now let me continue. After Margaret's death, my relationship with my children changed dramatically. Catherine, my only daughter, lives in Denver with her husband and their 2 little ones. She calls me every week, visits when she can, and always asks if I need anything. Michael, the youngest, is in California working as a doctor, but he maintains constant contact with me, sends me money even though I don't ask for it, and every time he comes to Chicago, he hugs me like it might be the last time we see each other. Alexander, my eldest son, is a completely different story. At 42 years old, he's a successful businessman in the construction industry. He has a thriving company, a beautiful house in Highland Park, 2 teenage children, and a wife who comes from a wealthy family. During the first years after his mother's death, Alexander visited me regularly, but little by little, the visits became less frequent. First it was every 2 weeks, then once a month, then every 2 months, until he practically disappeared from my life. Have you ever felt the weight of abandonment from a child? Have you experienced that feeling that someone to whom you gave life, whom you raised with love and sacrifice, suddenly treats you as if you were a burden, an obstacle in their prosperous lives? Because that was exactly what I felt every time I tried to communicate with Alexander. The few times I managed to talk to him on the phone, his answers were monosyllabic, curt, always in a hurry. "Dad, I'm in a meeting." "Dad, I have to take the kids to school." "Dad, I can't talk right now." He never asked how I was, if I needed anything, if I felt lonely. For him, I had become an uncomfortable obligation, something that had to be kept at a distance. Months passed and my health began to deteriorate slowly. At 74, the body doesn't respond like it used to. I have diabetes, high blood pressure, and my knees have started failing me after so many years working on construction sites. Some mornings I wake up in pain, others with a fatigue that seems endless. But I've always been an independent, proud man, and I didn't want to be a burden to my children. One March afternoon, while I was preparing my lunch in the kitchen, something completely unexpected happened. I was cutting vegetables to make soup when suddenly I felt a terrible dizziness. My legs gave out, my vision blurred, and before I could react, my body collapsed backward. I fell hard against the kitchen floor, hitting my head against the edge of the refrigerator and feeling a sharp pain in my right arm. For several minutes that felt like eternity, I remained on the floor unable to move. The pain was unbearable, but more than the physical pain, what terrified me most was the absolute solitude of that moment. There I was, a man who had built bridges and buildings, who had raised 3 children, who had worked his whole life, lying on his own kitchen floor like a wounded animal, with no one who could help me. With superhuman effort, I managed to reach my cell phone that had fallen near me. My hands were shaking as I dialed Alexander's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello?" He answered with his usual voice, cold and distant. "Alexander, it's Dad," I said with a voice I could barely recognize as my own. "I fell in the kitchen. I think I broke my arm. I can't get up." The response I received is something I will never be able to forget for as long as I live. Instead of concern, instead of rushing to come help me, Alexander sighed deeply and said to me, "Dad, can't you call an ambulance? I'm at a very important business lunch, and I can't leave right now." I begged him, "Son, please, I don't want to go to the hospital alone. I'm scared. I need you to be with me." His response was even colder. "Dad, you're not a child anymore. You have to learn to solve your problems on your own." After 20 more minutes of pleading, Alexander finally agreed to come, but not without first making me feel like I was a huge inconvenience to him. "Fine, Dad. I'm coming over there, but this can't keep happening. You're too old to be living alone." When he finally arrived at my house, an hour after my call, he found me still on the floor, shaking with pain and cold. His first reaction wasn't to ask how I felt or help me get up. His first reaction was to observe the scene with an expression of annoyance and say, "Dad, look at the mess you made. There's blood on the floor, vegetables everywhere. How are you going to clean all this up?" With Alexander's help, I managed to get up and we headed to the hospital. During the entire ride in his car, he didn't stop making comments about how inconvenient the whole situation was. "Dad, I had a very important dinner tonight with some Japanese investors. This is going to cost me a lot of money. Dad, my wife is going to be furious because we were supposed to go to my son's theater performance. Dad, you seriously need to think about moving somewhere where there's someone who can take care of you." At the hospital, doctors confirmed that I had a fracture in my right arm and a mild concussion from the hit to my head. They kept me under observation all night. Alexander stayed with me for the first 2 hours, but he spent the time answering work calls and sending text messages. Around 10 at night, he told me, "Dad, the doctors are with you now. I have to go. I have a meeting first thing tomorrow morning, and I need to rest." I spent that night alone in the hospital, with my arm in a cast and a terrible headache, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain I felt in my chest. While I was lying there, in that cold bed, I remembered all the times Alexander had been sick as a child, and I had spent entire nights taking care of him. I remembered the early mornings I stayed awake when he had fever, the times I missed work to take him to the doctor, the sacrifices Margaret and I made to give him the best education possible. The next day, Alexander came to pick me up from the hospital. On the way back home, while I struggled against the nausea produced by the pain medication, he said something to me that I never expected to hear from my own son's lips. "Dad," he said while driving without even turning to look at me, "I think it's time for you to accept reality. You're too old to be living alone. You could have died yesterday, and honestly, in your current state, you better hope something like this doesn't happen again because I won't be able to come running every time you have an accident." The words burned into me like red-hot iron. "You could have died yesterday." There wasn't a hint of relief in his voice about the fact that I had survived. There was no gratitude that I was still alive. It was as if for him, my death would have been more convenient than my survival. When we got to my house, Alexander helped me inside, but instead of staying a while to make sure I was okay, he immediately started talking about his plan. "Dad, I've been researching several very good nursing homes here in the city. There's one called Sunset Residences that has very good references. I think you should seriously consider it." I told him I wasn't ready to go to a nursing home, that I could still take care of myself, that it had just been an accident. His response was brutal. "Dad, don't be stubborn. Look what happened yesterday. Next time you might not be lucky enough to reach the phone. You could be lying there until they find you dead. Is that what you want?" During the following weeks, while I recovered from the fracture, Alexander began a systematic campaign to convince me to move to a nursing home. He would arrive at my house unannounced, always with brochures from different senior residences, always with arguments about why it would be best for everyone. "Dad, think about it carefully," he would tell me while putting the brochures on my kitchen table. "In the nursing home, you'd have nurses 24 hours a day, recreational activities, other men your age to talk with. Besides, we could visit you on weekends without having to worry about something happening to you during the week. Have you noticed how some people can present the most absolute cruelty as if it were an act of kindness? Because that was exactly what Alexander was doing. Every time he talked about the nursing home, he presented it as if he were doing me a favor, as if it were the perfect solution for all our problems. One afternoon, while I was reviewing some documents in my study, I found something that made me understand why Alexander was in such a hurry to put me in a nursing home. Among my papers was an envelope I didn't remember seeing before. I opened it and found a professional appraisal of my house. Someone had ordered my property appraised without my knowledge, and the document was dated just 1 week after my accident. The house that Margaret and I built with so much love, where we raised our children, where we lived so many happy moments, had been appraised at $1,200,000. It was a considerable sum, especially for someone who had expansion plans in his construction business. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed thinking about the appraisal, thinking about Alexander's insistence that I go to a nursing home, thinking about his cold words after my accident. Little by little, The pieces of the puzzle began to form a clear and painful picture. My son wasn't worried about my well-being. My son was worried about my house. The next day, I decided to make a call that would change everything. I dialed the number of my old partner, engineer Carlos Martinez, who now worked as a real estate expert. "Carlos," I said, "I need you to do me a very important favor, and I need it to be completely confidential." I told him about the appraisal I had found and asked him to investigate who had requested it. Carlos is a meticulous man, and 2 days later he called me with information that left me speechless. "Robert," he said with a grave voice, "the appraisal was requested by your son Alexander through his construction company. But that's not all. He also researched the prices of several nursing homes, and there are records that he contacted a lawyer specializing in property transfers." The picture was clear as water. Alexander had a perfectly calculated plan. Convince me to go to a nursing home, keep my house, sell it, and use the money to expand his business. And the most painful thing of all was that he was doing it with the coldness of a business transaction, without considering for a second the emotional value that house had for me. During the following days, I observed my son with completely different eyes. Each of his visits had a specific purpose: evaluate my health condition, pressure me about the nursing home, make comments about how difficult it was to maintain such a large house. In one of his visits, he even had the audacity to tell me, "Dad, this house is too big for you. Besides, it must be losing value because you're not maintaining it properly. It would be better to sell it while you can still get a good price." But Alexander didn't know something very important about his father. He didn't know that during my 45 years as a civil engineer, I had learned not only to build buildings, but also to be extremely meticulous with documentation. He didn't know that every dollar I had earned in my life was perfectly recorded, every investment documented, every transaction backed up with receipts and contracts. And above all, he didn't know that 10 years ago, when Margaret got sick with cancer, I had made a very important decision. Knowing that treatments were going to be expensive and that I wanted to leave something secure for my children after my death, I had made an investment that very few people knew about. In 2014, an old coworker offered me the opportunity to invest in a real estate development project in Miami Beach. It was a luxury condominium project facing the ocean, aimed at foreign tourists. The initial investment was $175,000, a considerable sum at that time, but the profit projections were extraordinary. Margaret and I discussed the investment for weeks. She was worried about risking so much money, but I had a very strong feeling about that project. "Margaret," I told her, "this money is going to be for our children and grandchildren. It's going to be our inheritance, our way of continuing to take care of them after we're no longer here." The investment turned out to be one of the best financial decisions of my life. The condominium sold out completely in less than 2 years, and my participation multiplied by 10. By 2016, that $175,000 had become $1,750,000. But I didn't touch that money. I left it invested in the trust that managed the project, earning compound interest year after year. By 2024, 10 years later, my investment had grown to more than $5,200,000. It was a fortune I kept secret, documented only in a safety deposit box at the bank, because I wanted it to be a surprise for my children after my death. I wanted them to remember their father not as an old man who was a burden to them, but as someone who continued working for their well-being until the last day of his life. But Alexander's attitude after my accident made me completely reconsider my plans. If he was capable of seeing my possible death as a convenience, if he was capable of planning to keep my house while I was still alive, then I needed to know the true nature of his character before making any decisions about my inheritance. I decided to do a test that would definitively reveal who my son really was. One afternoon, while he was at my house pressuring me again about the nursing home topic, I told him, "Alexander, I've been thinking about what you've told me, and I think you're right. Maybe it's time to seriously consider the nursing home." Alexander's face lit up immediately. It was the first time in months that I had seen him genuinely excited about something related to me. "Dad, I'm so glad you're finally seeing things realistically. Do you have any particular place in mind?" I told him I had been looking at the brochures he had left me, and that Sunset Residences seemed like a good option. "But there's a problem, son," I added. "That place costs $5,500 a month, and with my pension, I can barely cover those expenses. I would have to sell the house to be able to pay the nursing home's monthly fee." The speed with which Alexander responded to that information confirmed all my suspicions. "Dad, that's an excellent idea. In fact, I can help you with the entire sales process. I know several buyers who would be interested in a property like yours. We could have it sold in less than a month." "But son," I said, feigning concern. "This house is worth a lot of money. I wouldn't want to be scammed or not get a fair price." His response chilled my blood. "Dad, don't worry about that. I'll take care of everything. I have contacts in the real estate sector, and I guarantee you'll get a fair price. Besides, once it's sold, I could manage your money so it yields more. In my company, I have very good investment opportunities." Do you realize what was happening? My son not only wanted me to sell my house, but he also wanted to manage the money from the sale. In his mind, I was already an incompetent man who needed him to make all the decisions for me. During the following weeks, Alexander became the most attentive son in the world, but only in relation to selling the house and my move to the nursing home. He took me to visit Sunset Residences, helped me fill out all the admission papers, accompanied me to talk with real estate agents. For the first time in years, he seemed genuinely interested in spending time with me, but there was something that deeply bothered me about that whole situation. At no point did Alexander ask me how I felt about leaving the house where I had lived so many years. He never asked if it made me sad to separate from the memories of his mother. He was never interested in the emotional aspect of that whole transition. For him, I was simply a logistical problem that had to be solved in the most efficient way possible. One night, while we were having dinner at a restaurant near the nursing home we had visited that afternoon, I decided to do another test. "Son," I said, "there's something that worries me about this whole change." Alexander looked up from his cell phone for the first time in the entire dinner. "What worries you, Dad?" "I'm worried about running out of money," I lied to him. "The nursing home costs $5,500 a month, and if I live 10 more years, that's almost $700,000. My house is worth less than $1,300,000. What am I going to do if I run out of money and can no longer pay for the nursing home?" Alexander's response showed me exactly how deep his selfishness was. "Dad, don't worry about that. To be honest, most people your age don't live 10 more years, and if you did run out of money, there's always the option of transferring to a more economical nursing home or even a public one." Can you believe what I had just heard? My own son, the son I raised with love and sacrifice, had just told me that I would probably die soon, and that if I had the bad luck to live too long, I could end up in a public nursing home. He hadn't offered to help me financially. He hadn't suggested that I could live with him if I ran out of money. His solution was for me to settle for a cheaper place or simply die on time. That night, while driving back to my house, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time for Alexander to know the truth about his father. It was time for him to understand that he had completely underestimated the person he had been manipulating. The next day, I made a call to my lawyer, attorney Fernando Rodriguez, who had handled all my legal affairs for the past 20 years. "Fernando," I said, "I need you to prepare some very specific documents, and I need it to be completely confidential work." I explained the entire situation with Alexander, told him about the secret appraisal of my house, about his plans to put me in a nursing home, about his cruel comments after my accident. Fernando listened to me in silence, and at the end he told me, "Robert, I've been your lawyer for 2 decades, and you've never asked me for anything like this. You must be very hurt by all this." I asked him to prepare 2 documents. First, a notarized power of attorney that would give Catherine, my daughter, total control over my medical and financial decisions in case I became incapacitated. Second, a complete modification to my will, where Alexander went from being the main heir of my assets to receiving only the minimum amount required by law. But that wasn't all. I also asked Fernando to prepare a document that would reveal my true financial situation. I wanted Alexander to know exactly how much money he had lost due to his cruelty and greed. A week later, when all the documents were ready, I told Alexander that I needed to talk to him about something very important related to selling the house. I arranged to meet him at my house for a dinner that would change our lives forever. That afternoon, I prepared a special meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes, Alexander's favorite dish when he was a child. I set the table with the good dishes that Margaret and I only used on special occasions. I wanted it to be a memorable dinner because I knew it would be the last time we would eat together as father and son. Alexander arrived on time, as always when it came to matters related to money. "Dad," he said as he sat at the table, "it smells delicious." "It's been years since you made pot roast." For a moment I saw a flash of the child he had been, of the son I remembered fondly. During dinner, we talked about trivial things, the weather, his children, his work. Alexander was in a good mood, probably thinking that he had finally managed to convince me to do what he wanted. When we finished eating, I served him coffee and told him, "Son, I've made a decision about the house and the nursing home." His eyes lit up with anticipation. "Really, Dad? Have you decided when you're going to sell?" Yes, Alexander, I've decided. But before I tell you my decision, there are some things you need to know about your father. I took out the documents I had prepared with Fernando and put them on the table. During the past few months, I've been observing your behavior very carefully, and I've come to some very painful conclusions. Alexander's expression changed immediately. The smile disappeared from his face and was replaced by a look of confusion and nervousness. What are you talking about, Dad? I'm talking about the appraisal of my house that you ordered without my knowledge, I said while putting the document on the table. I'm talking about your conversations with lawyers specializing in property transfers. I'm talking about your perfectly calculated plan to put me in a nursing home and keep my house. Alexander visibly paled. Dad, I was just trying to help you. I just wanted to be prepared for when it was necessary. Don't lie to me, Alexander, I said with a calm I didn't know I possessed. Don't insult my intelligence. For 45 years I was a civil engineer. I built bridges, buildings, highways. Do you really think I'm not capable of understanding a plan as simple as yours? I showed him copies of all the investigations Carlos Martinez had done. The records of his calls to nursing homes, his consultations with lawyers, his searches for potential buyers for my house. You did all this before I even accepted the idea of going to a nursing home. You planned everything from the moment I fell in that kitchen. Alexander tried to defend himself. Dad, you have to understand my position. I have my own business, my own family. I can't come running every time you have an emergency. The nursing home is the best solution for everyone. The best solution for everyone? I asked him. Or the best solution for you? Because let me explain what was really going through your mind, son. I showed him the information about his business expansion plans. You need capital to expand your company. My house is worth almost $1,300,000. It was perfect for your plans, wasn't it? For the first time in that entire conversation, Alexander was completely silent. He couldn't deny the evidence in front of him. But there's something else you need to know, Alexander. Something that completely changes this entire situation. I took out the documents of my Miami Beach investment. During all these months that you've been planning how to keep my house worth $1,300,000, you didn't know that your father has an investment worth $5,200,000. Alexander's face changed completely. His eyes fixed on the documents as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. $5,200,000? Where? How? $5,200,000, son. An investment I made 10 years ago, thinking about my children's and grandchildren's future. An investment I kept secret because I wanted it to be a beautiful surprise after my death. I wanted them to remember their father as someone who continued taking care of them until the end. I explained the entire history of the investment, how it had grown year after year, how I had documented every dollar with the meticulousness that characterized me throughout my professional career. This investment, Alexander, was for all three of you. For you, for Catherine, for Michael. It was my way of making sure you had a prosperous future after my death. Alexander looked at the documents with an expression I had never seen on his face. It was a mixture of amazement, disbelief, and something that hurt me to recognize. Calculated regret. It wasn't regret for having treated me badly, but regret for not knowing about the money before showing his true nature. Dad, he said with a voice that tried to sound repentant, I didn't know. If I had known you had that investment, I never would have. Never would have what, Alexander? I interrupted him. Never would have treated me like a burden. Never would have planned to steal my house. Never would have told me it was better if I died soon so as not to spend too much money at the nursing home. My voice rose for the first time in the entire conversation. So a son's love and respect for his father depends on how much money that father has? Alexander tried to take my hand, but I pulled it away. Dad, please, let me explain. I was stressed. I have a lot of pressure at work. My wife has been pressuring me to resolve your situation. It's not that I don't love you, it's just that I'm more valuable dead than alive, right? I said. Because that's how you saw me, Alexander, as a problem that had to be solved in the most convenient way for you. I showed him the next document I had prepared with Fernando. This is a power of attorney that gives your sister Catherine total control over my medical and financial decisions. Catherine, who lives in Denver but calls me every week. Catherine, who has never seen me as a burden. Catherine, who cried with me when her mother died, and who since then has made sure I know I'm not alone in the world. And this, I continued showing him the final document, is my new will. In it, Catherine receives 60% of my inheritance. Michael receives 30%. And you, Alexander, receive the 10% that the law requires as a minimum for a child. The transformation in Alexander's face was immediate and dramatic. The color completely drained from his face, and for the first time since he was a small child, I saw him begin to cry. "Dad, you can't do this. I'm your eldest son. I've always worked hard. I have my family, my responsibilities." "Exactly," I told him. "You have your family, your responsibilities, your successful business. According to you, you don't need an old father who could die at any moment. According to you, it was better for me to go to a nursing home so as not to bother you anymore." "But Dad, I didn't mean it seriously. I was pressured, confused. You know I love you, that I've always loved you." His tears now flowed freely down his cheeks, but I had seen too much to believe in his sudden repentance. "Do you know what's the saddest thing about all this, Alexander?" I said while putting away the documents. "It's not that you wanted to keep my house. It's not even that you planned to put me in a nursing home. The saddest thing is that when I fell in that kitchen, when I was lying on the floor, vulnerable and scared, your first reaction wasn't love, it wasn't protection, it wasn't the instinct to take care of your father. Your first reaction was to see an opportunity." Alexander got up from his chair and approached me. "Dad, please, give me another chance. I can change. I can be a better son. I didn't know what I was doing." "You didn't know what you were doing when you said it was better if I died soon?" I asked him. "You didn't know what you were doing when you ordered the appraisal of my house behind my back? You didn't know what you were doing when you told me your Japanese investors were more important than your injured father?" Alexander knelt next to my chair, something he hadn't done since he was a small child. "Dad, I'm your son. I made terrible mistakes, but I'm your son. You have to forgive me." "Yes, you are my son," I told him, "and that's precisely the reason why this hurts me so much. I raised a man who is capable of seeing his father's vulnerability as a business opportunity. I raised a man who would prefer his father to die on time rather than have to take care of him." I got up from my chair and walked to the living room window, the same window from which Margaret and I used to watch our children play in the yard. "Alexander, I want you to leave my house and not contact me again unless it's absolutely necessary." "Dad, you can't do this!" Alexander shouted. "I'm your son! You can't cut me out of your life like this." I turned to look at him one last time. "You already cut me out of your life, son. The only thing I'm doing is formalizing what you already decided when you saw me as a problem instead of as your father." Alexander continued pleading for several more minutes, but his words no longer had any effect on me. I finally understood that his tears weren't from regret for having hurt me, but from frustration for having lost a millionaire inheritance. When he finally left my house that night, I knew I had made the right decision. A man who is capable of seeing his father's death as a convenience doesn't deserve to be called a son. The following days were difficult, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about Alexander's uncomfortable visits. I didn't have to listen to his comments about how inconvenient my existence was. I didn't have to pretend I didn't notice how he evaluated my house every time he came. Catherine called me 3 days later. She had talked to Alexander, who had told her his version of events. "Dad," she said with her always warm voice, "Alexander told me you had a very strong argument. He says you cut him out of the inheritance." "Catherine, sweetheart," I said. "There are things your brother didn't tell you." I explained the entire situation. The secret appraisal, the nursing home plans, the cruel comments after my accident. Catherine listened to me in silence, and when I finished speaking, she sighed deeply. "Dad, I'm so sad to hear this. I never imagined Alexander was capable of treating you that way. Mom would be devastated if she knew what he's done. That's why I made the decision I made, daughter. Your mother and I raised you to be good people, not to see your family as business opportunities." Catherine visited me the following week. She traveled from Denver with her 2 small children, my grandchildren who always get excited to see their grandfather. During her visit, we talked at length about the future, about my plans, about my fears of aging alone. "Dad," she said while we were having coffee in the garden, "I've been thinking about everything you told me about Alexander, and I think you did the right thing, but I'm also worried about you staying alone here in the city. Have you considered moving to Denver? You could live near us, and I could take care of you without it being a burden on anyone." Catherine's proposal touched me deeply. It wasn't like Alexander's proposal, which was motivated by convenience and greed. Catherine's proposal was born from genuine love and the desire to have her father close. "It's a beautiful idea, daughter," I told her, "but this house has too many memories of your mother. I'm not ready to leave it all behind." "I understand, Dad, but I want you to know that the door of my house is always open for you, and if you ever change your mind or if you need help with anything, you just have to tell me." Michael called me from California 2 weeks later. He had also talked to Alexander and had a different perspective on the whole situation. "Dad," he said during our video call, "I think Alexander made terrible mistakes, but I also think maybe you should consider giving him a second chance. Michael, son, I replied, I understand your perspective, but there are things that can't be forgiven. It's not just what he did, but what it revealed about his character. A man who sees his father's vulnerability as an opportunity doesn't change overnight. But Dad, he's your son. He's my brother. Family is the most important thing we have. Exactly, Michael. Family is the most important thing, and that's precisely the reason why I can't forgive someone who was willing to sacrifice his family for money. 6 months have passed since that dinner with Alexander. 6 months in which I've lived with a peace I hadn't felt in years. My relationship with Catherine has strengthened enormously. She calls me every day, visits me once a month, and we've developed a connection we never had before. Michael has also intensified our contact. We now do video calls twice a week, and he's promised me that this year he'll come spend Christmas with me in Chicago. As for Alexander, he has tried to contact me on several occasions. He has sent me letters, left messages on my phone, even come to knock on my door. But I remain firm in my decision. Every time I see him or hear his voice, I remember his words. You could have died yesterday. Last month, Catherine told me that Alexander is going through financial difficulties. His construction business is facing problems, and he urgently needs capital. Apparently, he had counted on the inheritance from my house to solve his economic problems. Dad, Catherine told me, I know this might sound terrible, but part of me thinks that everything happening to Alexander is a form of justice. He was counting on your money to solve his problems, and now he has to face the consequences of his bad decisions. I don't feel joy about Alexander's problems, but I don't feel compassion either. A 42-year-old man who builds his business plan expecting his father to die soon must learn to solve his problems without counting on anticipated inheritances. 2 weeks ago, I had another minor accident at home. This time, I slipped in the bathroom and hurt my back. I couldn't get up from the floor for several minutes, and for a terrible moment, I relived the experience of my fall in the kitchen. I called Catherine immediately. Dad, I'm coming over, she said without hesitating for a second. I'm taking the first flight I can find. She arrived that same night, took care of me for a complete week, and made sure I was completely recovered before returning to Denver. Can you see the difference? When I called Alexander after my first fall, his reaction was one of annoyance and convenience. When I called Catherine after my second fall, her reaction was one of immediate love and protection. That experience confirmed to me that I had made the right decision about my will. The $5,200,000 from my investment will go to people who truly deserve to inherit not only my money, but also my love and respect. During these weeks of reflection, I've thought a lot about the lessons this experience has taught me. The first lesson is that money really reveals people's character. Alexander showed his true nature not when he was poor, but when he thought he was going to inherit wealth. The second lesson is that age and vulnerability don't automatically make us burdens to our children. They make us tests of their character. Some children pass that test with honor, like Catherine and Michael. Others fail it miserably, like Alexander. The third lesson is that it's never too late to make brave decisions about our lives. At 74 years old, I still have the power to decide who deserves my love, my respect, and my inheritance. A week ago, I made a final decision about my future. I've decided to stay in my house in Chicago, but I've hired a part-time nurse who comes to help me with household chores and to make sure I'm healthy. Her name is Hope. She's 50 years old, and in the few weeks she's been working with me, she has treated me with more respect and affection than my own eldest son has in the past 2 years. I've also decided to start enjoying my money while I'm alive. I've planned a trip to Europe for next year, something Margaret and I always wanted to do but never could for economic reasons. Catherine and her children are going to accompany me, and Michael is trying to get vacation time to join us. And do you know what's the most ironic thing about this whole situation? Alexander lost $5,200,000 for trying to steal $1,300,000. If he had been a loving and respectful son, if he had been by my side during my moment of vulnerability, if he had shown genuine concern for my well-being instead of seeing my accident as an opportunity, he would have inherited the largest fortune he ever imagined. But his greed and cruelty cost him not only the money, but also his father. And that, I believe, is the greatest loss of all. Last night, while I was having dinner alone in my kitchen, the same place where I fell almost a year ago, I received a text message from Alexander. It said, "Dad, please, give me a chance to explain everything. I miss you so much, and I want you to know that I love you." I read the message several times, and for a moment, I felt a pang of the paternal love I will always have for him, despite everything he has done. But then I remembered his words after my accident. "You could have died yesterday." I remembered the coldness in his eyes when he saw me lying on the floor. I remembered the secret appraisal of my house. I deleted the message without responding. Because sometimes, the deepest love we can show someone is allowing them to face the consequences of their decisions. And Alexander's decisions were as clear as they were cruel. He chose money over love, convenience over compassion, greed over gratitude. Now, at 74 years old, I'm learning to live with the consequences of my own decisions. And so far, I feel at peace with each and every one of them. This story has taught me that we should never underestimate the power of an elderly person who still has their dignity intact. It has taught me that true love is demonstrated in moments of vulnerability, not in moments of convenience. And it has taught me that sometimes the most difficult decision a father can make is to recognize that one of his children doesn't deserve his forgiveness. I want to dedicate these last words to all of you who have accompanied me in this story, so painful but so necessary to tell. If there's something I hope you take from my experience, it's this. Never allow anyone, not even your own children, to treat you as if you were a burden or a problem to be solved. You have value, you have dignity, and you deserve love and respect, regardless of your age or condition. If any of you are going through a similar situation, if you feel that your children see you as a nuisance, if you've begun to doubt your own worth, I want you to remember my story. Remember that wisdom comes with age, but true power comes from knowing when and how to use that wisdom to protect our dignity. And to those of you who are adult children, who may have lost patience with your elderly parents, who may have seen them as problems to solve instead of treasures to care for, I ask you to reflect deeply on the kind of person you want to be. Because at the end of the day, the way we treat our vulnerable parents is the way our own children are going to treat us when we reach that age. The circle of life is perfect in its justice. What we sow in youth, we reap in old age. What we give in strength, we receive in weakness. Alexander is beginning to learn this lesson, although it may be too late to repair the damage he caused in our relationship. I, for my part, am at peace. I have 2 wonderful children who love and respect me. I have resources to live comfortably for the rest of my days, and I have the satisfaction of knowing I defended my dignity when it was necessary. To you, dear listeners, who have had the patience and kindness to listen to this story to the end, I thank you profoundly. If at any moment you felt moved, if something I shared resonated in your hearts, I ask you to leave your like as a way of telling me I'm not alone in this world. Every like I receive is like a hug from someone who understands the pain and complexity of family relationships. If you know someone who could benefit from hearing this story, someone who is going through a similar situation, or simply someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to defend their dignity, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and share these stories. Because at the end of the day, we all need to know we're not alone in our struggles. Write in the comments if you've lived through something similar, if you have elderly parents you need to call tonight, or if my words have made you reflect on your own family relationships. I love reading your stories, your reflections, your advice. Every comment you leave is a reminder that we are a community of people who support each other in difficult times. From wherever you're listening to me, whether it's from Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Miami, or any other place in this great country we call home, I want you to know that your experiences matter, that your feelings are valid, and that you deserve to be treated with love and respect regardless of your age or circumstance. Until the next story, dear friends, may all of you find in your families the love and respect you deserve, and may you never have to face the cruelty I faced with my son Alexander. Because at the end of the day, the family that really matters isn't necessarily the one we share by blood, but the one we choose to build with love, respect, and mutual compassion. This has been my story. Painful, but real. Difficult, but necessary. And I hope educational for all of you. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention, and for allowing me to share with you one of the most complicated chapters of my life.